Hello and thanks for joining us for part 2 of the skeleton on a rocking chair step-by-step video. In this video we're going to complete the design. So we're going to finish off now with all the detailing, and as you can see we have got white back into our airbrush and we're now going to start to build our highlights. So I've switched back to my CMC plus micron with the 0.23mm needle in it, and I'm going to use that to create my highlights. So obviously with the highlights, follow your light source. My light source is pretty much where you see the reflection of my light that I'm actually using while I'm painting. So you see it there on the left of screen. So that's pretty accurate to where the actual light source is. So what I'm doing now is I'm going to further pull out some detail, but I don't want to go over everything that we've done. So especially on the bone, I find that doing really bright white highlights helps to give that bone effect. So I like to go up nice and close for those. Again, like I mentioned in part 1, my paint mix with white is usually pretty thin, and I do like to run my paint a lot thinner than most people would use, or that the paint companies would recommend. I just prefer to have it thinner so that it flows really nicely and I don't get as much tip drying. And especially with white, because white is one of those colors that it's really opaque and it can easily block up your airbrush as well. So having it thin is just going to make it so much easier for you to paint. The hardest thing is though, you need to then control it with your trigger and make sure it doesn't spider out on you. So just keep that in mind when running paint really thin. I tend to reduce my air pressure. So for something like what you're watching now, I'll probably run at 15 to 20 psi, and I'd reduce my paint sort of 20% paint, 80% reducer. And it's going to take longer to get that opaqueness and that instant coverage, but I'm okay with that. I'd rather it take a bit longer and I just build up gradually than saturating it and risking it spattering out on me, or getting like bits of dried paint in areas that I don't want that to happen. So by having it nice and thin, I'm just reducing the risk of tip dry, which is definitely a great option. So you can see how close I am. This is also why I wear a glove on my opposite hand, because I can then use that hand to steady myself when I'm up really close, and I can actually lean on the artwork. Because this is an automotive artwork, I don't want to risk any of the oils from my skin getting onto the job, which hasn't been obviously 2-pack cleared as yet. So that will happen once the artwork is complete, but up until that point I don't want to contaminate the surface. So that's why I do wear a glove on the opposite hand that I'm using for the airbrush. So in this case, as you can see, it's on my left hand, and that way I can rest on the artwork. So just doing those fine hairs with the white, keeping the airbrush moving up nice and close, and pulling that trigger back as I'm moving. So paint on, paint off, keeping the air pressure pressed down at all times. And try not to make the strands of hair as not perfectly uniformed, especially on this, like on a skeleton, you want them pretty scraggly, and obviously thinning too. So you can see quite a bit of detail's already been added to the skeleton's head. Now we're just going to render the other side of the hair. Had a bit of tip drying. So even running the paint this thin, I'm still getting some tip drying. It's still going to be there. It's just going to make it a lot less prominent, that's all. So you can see how fine I can actually get the airbrush to go with that hair, which is good. And I'm just coating back over wherever I want it to become brighter. So you've got some nice variation there of thickness of strands of hair. So coming back in now, I'm going to start defining the hat. So the reason why I'm doing white highlights now, before I finish off with the final darker tone, is because white will always create a small overspray. So it doesn't matter how sharp you go and how good you are with your airbrush, it just tends to still create the slightest overspray. So by doing it now, it allows me to eliminate that later on by coming back in with the darker tone. Alright, so any little bit of overspray that's created at this stage, once I come in with that darker tone, that'll eliminate that and we'll have a nice clean edge. You can also still come back in with the white again afterwards, which it's pretty regular that I do that as well, just to brighten up a couple of little highlights here and there. But then, yeah, that's pretty much it. That's done. So keep that in mind, and that's why I do the white before the final tone. I just find it just allows you to have a much cleaner artwork in the end. You'll also notice that I'm not hitting white highlights on everything. Right, so I'm being selective. I'm remembering where my light source is coming from, and I'm brightening up those areas. So don't go overboard and go over the whole lot of it. If it doesn't need a white highlight, you know, less is more. So you can sometimes just hit a couple of little areas. Even just doing that dot highlight in the eye, it makes such a difference. You don't need to, you know, recoat the whole eye, or the eyeball for that matter in this case. You can see I'm adding some wood grain texture, or just some lines up and down to simulate wood grain. Notice how I'm just hitting that top left with the highlight of those bits on the rib cage there. So camera zoomed out a little bit now, you'll get to see some of the other areas coated in the white. Now if you haven't already watched part 1, I recommend you do, because it'll show you how we got up to this stage. And also we are speeding up certain areas of the video, and then other parts I'll keep in real time, so that way it's not completely sped up from start to finish, and that way you can, you know, but it's also not too boring. If we had it going, you know, at real time, it'd be hours and hours, this video. So we just we want to give you as much information as possible without boring you. So hopefully by doing that, it helps to, you know, on the more detailed sections, we generally do them in real time so that you can really grasp what we're doing. And then a lot of the repeated areas, you know, things that you've got to do over and over. And, you know, you may have already seen in part 1 of this video, we're just using a different tone. Well, those will speed up just to keep it a bit more interesting. So just texturing that handle. Again, nice and fine, up really close. I also adjust the pressure with the Mac valve on the front of this airbrush, so that's something that works really well. Working back on the rib cage. Just keep pulling out detail. That's what you want to do with the white, adding that extra element. I mean, if you absolutely don't like a section, you can always dust over it with the darker tone, but you might compromise a little bit on cleanliness of the design if you start doing that too much, and it could get quite dark. So try and be accurate with this tone as best as you can, and really just focus on adding highlights to the areas that will benefit from it. Up nice and close again to render the bones on the hands. Working on the barrels of the shotguns as well. By highlighting the top sections, we're getting a bit more of a 3D appearance. Some random tight dagger strokes just to create the illusion or the appearance of a wood grain type finish on the rocking chair, rather than just having a flat finish. Highlighting the boots and the soles. Apologies for some of the dark shadows in the camera and the filming, but this artwork was done over a period, so it was, you know, during the day and during the night, so that's why the camera went a bit darker in spots, so apologies for that, but hopefully you can still see what's going on and make sense of it all. So just hitting one of the edges of that 4x markings to give the illusion that it's carved in. Some more highlights. Bit more detail on the timber section of the rocking chair. Again, keeping the air on all the time and pulling back for paint. So, and I'm moving constantly as well. So I'm not just staying in one spot. If you do that, you'll get a heavier build-up in one area. So you want to avoid that. So you want to continuously move with your airbrush and then render that way. Start to build your tones. And don't rush this step, take your time. Keep checking your reference or your sketch and remembering where your light source is so that you don't overdo the white, because you don't want to go starting to put white in areas that should have had shadows. Couple of little highlights in the ground section to pick up the roughness of the ground and some of the stone and debris. Little things like that can really make the artwork a lot better than just having a fade out on the bottom. So back to transparent black. So this one is actually darker than the previous. Alright, so this is our transparent black mix, which is virtually black, but I still run some transparent base into it. Again, the reason being is I don't want it solid black. I want that control over it. You know, I don't want it to be too heavy, as it can be, you know, it can saturate the artwork very quickly. So by having the transparent base mixed with the black, and if you're unsure, I explained a bit more about that in part 1, but it just allows for more control over that shadow that you're doing. And especially at this stage of the design where, you know, you just want to add detail, but we don't want to kill it. Okay, so keep that in mind. You can also probably tell I've switched my airbrush again, so this time I've moved on to my CMSB custom micron. This has a 0.18mm needle, so the finest out of all my airbrushes, and it's got the side cup. So I tend to, you know, grab this one if I am doing really fine stuff or I just want to do the finishing tone. I'll use this one. I like the fact that the side cup is obviously on the side, being a side cup, but it allows for your vision to be unobstructed by a cup, like as you would when you're using a normal gravity feed airbrush, and the cup sits on top. So not that it's a big deal, but when you're up to the real fine stuff, and if the artwork is small, I mean, you can see how tiny this particular head of the skull is, and you know, even smaller those little skulls that are perched up on the back of the rocking chair, on the backrest there, you know. So I prefer to use the side feed for these sort of things where I can get in really close and I can see exactly what I'm doing. Plus, because it runs a 0.18 needle, it just makes it a lot easier to get that fine detail. So yeah, good airbrush, nice one to use. So just picking off a bit of tip drying. Pretty common now, you know, obviously you're using a finer needle, so as soon as you go the finer needles, I tend to run my paint thinner again, and drop the pressure, so it's, you know, between, again, probably closer to the 15 psi mark now for the side feed, and just really take my time adding in the detail and being wary of the possibility of tip drying, because it is going to happen, so you just got to be careful of that. I'm just getting my art tool template here, which is actually a True Fire template by Mike Lavallee, but I'm just using one of these just to try and get the right shape for the hat. I just want to really pick out that that design correctly and that sharp edge. So I've got a heap of these fire templates, and usually they fit, you know, they fit to one or two of the curves, so you just kind of grab some and test them out until you get the right shape, and then use them to your advantage. They allow you to get a nice crisp edge, and obviously with templates like this, if you want to still get a decent edge but a softer one, you can actually lift the template a little bit off the surface, and that'll allow you to get a softer spray. Whereas when you're resting it down like this, that's going to give you a real definite edge, which is what I want for the moment. But also be wary that, you know, when you are using templates, make sure that you've lined them up correctly. If you are working, you know, on something like that, on something like this Harley tank or anything metal, you can actually use magnets to help to, you know, hold it into place if you're not confident with airbrushing with one hand. So it is a bit trickier when you're trying to hold a stencil in the right position and then airbrushing it in. You know, obviously it's an airbrush, so it's blowing air. What happens when you blow air on a stencil? It starts to move. So keep that in mind. So utilize, you know, either masking tape or magnets or whatever you need to do to make the job easier for yourself. But you can see that's helped to define the edges of the hat, and now I'm just gradually adding more and more detail in different areas. So you notice with the strands now, I'm bringing in this thinned out black, or the transparent black, to pull those strands out, and I'm doing similar motion to what I did with the white. Alright, just getting a bit more detail out of the teeth as well. Again, take your time, like really take your time with this step, because these are the crucial steps now. It's a lot harder to fix it if you have to. You know, you virtually have to eliminate a whole section and then try and blend it back in, which, yeah, you don't really want to have to do that. So just be cautious, take your time. If you need to have a, sketch pad or a bit of scrap paper nearby, even put it on a clipboard and set it up right next to you, and just practice before you do any fine detail. Just practice doing some little lines until you're confident and you're comfortable to get up that close, and then render it accurately. So bit by bit, I'm just pulling out more detail, adding little bits of texture and cracks here and there, and then shading as well. You can see how I'm gradual with my shading. I'm not going overboard in one area, and I kind of move around a lot with my artwork for that reason. So that way I'm not just focusing on one spot. I can keep coming back to it, and then look upon it with fresh eyes. You might see something different. You might think, oh, it needs to be darker. So it's always a good idea to move around a bit when you're painting. At least I think so. So giving a few layers there to the hair. Rendering that jawline. Bit by bit. You'll also notice I've taken the front air cap off the CMSB Micron. All the old water airbrushes, you can remove the front air cap, and you'll find that it makes painting a little bit easier, especially from tip drying perspective. It's easier access to the needle, so it allows you to clean it off a lot easier. It also allows for finer detail, believe it or not. And on the new microns, some people may not know this, but when you unscrew it, and you might see it later on in the video, you actually can screw it on the back of the handle so you don't lose it, which is a great design feature. I wish they would have had that years ago, the amount of those things I've lost. Apologies for blocking the camera, but you can already see how much more detail I've added in using this darker tone, and how much it's shaping the artwork. So back to it. That would have been a quick clean out, I'd imagine. It's hard to exactly remember what I was doing, but generally when you're using this airbrush, it's, like I said, 0.18mm needle, so nice and fine, but does clog up a bit quicker than your 0.23, or even the 0.2 with the Segola. You definitely notice a difference. So just slowly but surely adding in all those darker tones. Working on this rib area now, the rib cage. Still up pretty close with my airbrush. Again, it's hard to see the exact distance because of the angle of the camera, but I can assure you I'm pretty close. Oh, there you go, you can see the air cap now secured to the back of the handle of the airbrush. I did actually swap out the trigger because I prefer the round triggers rather than the new square trigger that they've got on the Microns, but that's a personal preference thing. So for anyone that's picked up on that, because that is a version 1 airbrush, they usually have the round triggers. So I'm using that same art tool template now just to get that straight edge. So you can see how much more defined that is, and it makes the gun barrels really pop. So don't be afraid to use a template if it's going to benefit your artwork. I used to want to do everything freehand back in the day, but I soon realized that, you know, there's nothing wrong with using a template or paper template. Even, you know, I use eraser pencils quite a bit. You know, it just depends on what you're doing, but it definitely does help to create better looking artwork because you instantly get that sense of depth. But again, you don't want to overdo it. I do like majority freehand. I think that looks, in my opinion, I think it looks better rather than having everything masked. So that to me looks then a bit too, I don't know, the edges are too perfect. So I'm kind of happy just being somewhere in the middle. I do as much as I can freehand, but you know, for areas that definitely need a sharp edge, then I'll switch to like a loose mask, being a freehand shield, or using masking tape, or you know, application tape or pinstripe tape, whatever it is, to get that sharp edge. So you can see by going nice and crisp around those fingers, they've really popped as well now. And you can see how this tone, and that's why I explained how I like to do the white before the final tone, and this exactly shows you why. You can see how we get a nice clean finish. It really does eliminate any of that overspray that we got from, you know, doing the white. Even though we were careful with the white, doesn't matter, it still can overspray very easily. Nice and fine to add the texturing on that handle. So really close for that, and they're virtually like little, very tiny little lines or dagger strokes as they may be. Hope you're enjoying this video. If this is the first time watching one of our videos, then welcome. If you're a returning subscriber, then thank you for all of your support and for tuning into another video. We really appreciate it. If you are new to this channel, we would love to have you as part of our community, so feel free to hit subscribe and tap on that bell icon. If you do that, what will happen is you'll get a notification every time we either go live or put out any new content. So yeah, we'd love to have you join the community, and hopefully these videos help to inspire you to create some amazing artwork. So just detailing those fingers a bit more. Really, really sharp to make those bones pop. And there's a bit of a shadow as well, so that it looks like it's actually holding the barrel. of the shotgun. Just adding more and more detail. Still just using this final dark tone, so you can see how versatile it is. You know, if you're further away, you can still get a reasonably soft shadow, but up close it'll give you a really nice, sharp, defined line or defined shadow, depending on what you're going for. And it's definitely a lot easier to control, even though it's almost black. It's not 100% black because it's not just using black straight out of the bottle and mixing that with reducer. By putting the transparent base in, it just takes the edge off it and makes for easier control and less, I suppose, chance that you're going to kill the artwork, because black is just almost too powerful to use on its own. Bit more detail on those barrels, and going back to the freehand shield just to pop out some of that as well. So the good thing about using a freehand shield as opposed to masking is that you have no risk of lifting off any of the paint. Not that it should lift off anyway if you've prepped the surface correctly. This was pre-prepared by our painter, so it was all prepped, primed. There was a repair to be done, and then painted in a 2K black. So ready for me to airbrush on top of, and then once I finish it, it'll get 2-pack cleared. So we do outsource all of our paint as far as clearing and base colors. That way, yeah, we just leave it up to the professionals to do it. So keep that in mind if you are airbrushing from home, or you know, you're not in an area where you can do that. I mean, we could do it here at our shop, but we choose not to because we just like to keep it an airbrush studio. Plus, you know, we run classes and that, so we don't want to risk spraying lots of toxic stuff around the place. And you know, we would have to install a booth if we wanted to do it, so it's just going to take up too much room. So we find that outsourcing it's better. It allows us to focus on just doing artwork, and you know, we get everything prepped and painted for us, which works well. And they're doing it every day, so they're masters at it. So it's always best to leave it up to the experts, I think. So if you know, doing it from home and trying to find someone reputable, I'd go and chat to your local auto body shops, repair shops, or even if you've got an auto paint supplier, ask them for some recommendations. Give them some small projects to trial. Helmets are always a good thing to let them have a go at, because they're still curved, so they're challenging to do, because anyone can really do a flat panel. So if you gave them a flat, you know, composite panel, it's fairly easy to do. So I'd be giving them a helmet or something just to test, make sure you're happy with their service, and then get them to clear over your artwork. Saves you the hassle. Just adding some detail to those fine skulls on the top of the back of the backrest of the rocking chair. You can really notice how much this darker tone is changing the piece. Just really makes it pop. Eyeballs on this one. Start detailing it. Just working in some of these darker shadows now as well, and defining some of these sort of lines in that timber section. So up nice and close again. Obviously, because the air cap's removed, and when you're working extremely close, especially on a Harley tank, just be wary that you don't smash your needle into the tank, because not only could you scratch your tank, you could also damage your needle, and you don't want to do either of those, trust me. So we're getting pretty close to nearly done with this darker tone, I reckon. A lot of the details being put in, which is good. Taking my time to render it. Even the simple areas, I'm still being nice and cautious not to overdo it. You see I'm dusting heavier on that on one side to really give it the illusion of that it's rounded. That's where your light source really comes into play. So keep referring back to that. Just knocking some of the things into the background. So even if you shade sort of 90% of it and you just see a little bit, that can really work effectively. It's better to have something painted there and then you almost eliminate it than not to have anything there at all and have a flat surface. So keep that in mind when you're rendering your artworks. More detail on the sole of the boot there. Just zoom in so you can see a bit more of how we're creating all this. Apologies because some of that is pretty hard to see, but you'll get the idea when I do the other boot. It's pretty straightforward really. You're pretty much following what you've already done within reason. I mean, you're not just coating over the top of it, but you are following a lot of the existing shadows that you've put in with the last tone. So you're just deepening those shadows by coming back in with this darker tone. So working on the bottom area of the debris there, adding a bit more texture. Working on the base of the rocking chair. Starting to detail all that, really pull it out and add the shadows where necessary. The laces. The boot. Constantly moving around, as I mentioned earlier, so just jumping from area to area, starting to render one spot and then I'll move to the next, and then a lot of the time I'll come back to an area as well. Adding some detail to the sole of the boot. So switching back to my CMC plus Micron now, and coming back in with some highlights now that I've done everything with the darker tone. So like I mentioned earlier, I will come in with highlights just to brighten up certain areas at the end, but I'm very selective the areas that I do, and now I'm really careful about my overspray. So even more so than before, you want to be extremely tight with this. I mean, you can always come in with the darker tone again just to clean it up, but we want to just add a little bit of brightness here and there. You can see how that's working really well in that debris area to add an extra layer to that surface, but again, you don't want to overkill it. You just want to brighten up some of the areas. So I generally go back, I'll brighten the bone, you know, the eyeball. So just areas that I think will benefit from it without going overboard. Because you can kill it if you go overboard with this step. You can just put white highlights everywhere and it looks like a mess. So just adding a bit more detail to those little skulls. Now I'm grabbing the Texture Effects template by Art Tool, Gerald Mendez one. And I'm just going to add some grunge effect to it. These particular templates are extremely handy. Pretty sure this is the mini series release. You can also get them in a full size, so they're pretty much the same thing, they're just a bit bigger, but you get them in sets. So there's, in this particular set, so the Texture Effects templates 1, you get 3 different grungy effects, and Texture Effects 2 has some different ones. If you want to check them out, they're on our website. Gerald Mendez was the artist that brought these out, and they're released through Art Tool. But they're really handy template to use. Great for zombie skin as well, and all sorts of different effects. You can even use them for certain areas of rust, you know, so I mean they get used quite a bit. And these are actually not laser cut onto mylar, they're laser cut on the special coated paper, and that paper can be cleaned as well. So I mean, I tend to just clean them with Windex if you have to, because it's all water-based paint. But if you're using automotive, then you just use thinners or gun wash, and you could still wipe this particular stuff with that. Just got to be careful, it's not going to be as durable as your mylar ones would be. Again, if you're unsure, just try and clean a small corner of it before you saturate it, but I wouldn't go saturating it anyway with gun wash or thinners. I'd be doing it very carefully. But you can see how that just starts to create a nice little grunge effect, and very easy to do using the template. Saves you trying to do it all freehand. And now what I want to do is I want to add a bit of smoke coming out of the barrels of the shotgun, and in the smoke I'm just going to add some tiny little skulls hidden in amongst the smoke. So just using my freehand template here, the fire template that I've been using throughout the video, just to roughly sketch a few of those smoke licks. So this is very similar to how I would go about doing fire, except smoke is obviously, not as built up and a bit more wispy. And once I've established the flow of it, then I'm going to get some little skull templates and add the little skulls in as well. I don't want to overdo it, I just want it to be nice and subtle. So you can see I've got a little pile of skulls template here. This is a mini set that I got from Airsick templates, so they make some good templates as well. So I'm just going to use this to render in some of the skulls. So virtually this is like sketching them in, and then you render freehand off that. So I'm not just going to keep them as a solid templated skull, I'm going to still render them a bit to make them look a bit more effective. I think that's what a lot of people make a mistake when they use freehand templates. They just spray through the template and they'll leave it at that. The idea is that they're designed for people that really struggle with drawing, or that want to do an effect or replicate a design. That's what it's good for. Or like what I'm doing here, adding skulls in mist or smoke or in the background of something. If you want to hide them in trees or whatever you want to do, it's always good to use a template. It's just quick and easy, but then you get your outline and then you build from that. So then make up your own skull off that. Don't just spray through the stencil, it just looks way too templated then. So just carefully rendering those skulls using the white, and blending them back into those smoke kind of flame bits that are coming out of the shotgun barrels. So just using the white to sketch. You know, I've got my basic outline from the template, so I'm just elaborating off that. Keeping nice movements when I'm airbrushing the smoke too. I don't want to be too jagged with it, so you want to be nice and smooth, and just control your blends. You don't want to go too heavy with it either. You want some sort of transparency to give the illusion of smoke. Again, if you're not confident or unsure on how to do it, do a few test pieces. You know, even get yourself some bits of black paper, just scrap paper, and practice on that using the white. And you know, you can grab yourself a freehand template to make it easier, and then once you've got the feel for it and it looks, you know, you've got a nice flow, then you can replicate it on your artwork. So you can see I've got a couple in there now, airbrushed in with the white. Just brightening up certain areas now as well, and joining the smoke with the skulls so it all flows nicely. Doesn't take that much longer to add the skulls in, but it makes such a difference and just gives the artwork a bit more detail than rather than just having plain smoke coming out of the barrel. Apologies for the camera because you can't really see me rendering that one, but it's kind of at the tip of the teardrop section of the tank. That's the other reason why I wanted to do it. It just fills in that area and runs with the flow of the bike. Rather than having the smoke going straight up behind him, you know, the way I've run it down along the shape of the tank helps to accentuate the design. So now I'm just going back to my freehand template to hit some of these edges and get a bit of a sharper, more defined edge using my template. Again, don't overuse your template. You notice that I've been using it as well as using freehand, so don't just rely on the template 100% because it'll look pretty defined and unrealistic. You want to mix it up a bit, so you know, use your template to draw, and then you kind of join the dots with your freehand techniques, because you need some soft blends in there as well where the edge just disappears into nothing. So now that we've got the white base in there, I'll switch back to my transparent black, and I'm just going to detail the eye sockets, the nostrils and the teeth, and also shade some of the smoke that joins the skulls and is coming out of the barrel of the shotgun. So this is my sort of final detailing on this particular area. So much the same as rendering any other skull, it's just that with these smoke skulls I tend to not do obviously as many cracks and bits and pieces. You can have a couple here and there, but just not as textured as I normally would. And sometimes not finishing all of the artwork, like you know, having an eye socket that's sort of half rendered and then you have a bit of the smoke coming out of that, looks really effective as well. So the beauty of the black tank as well is that you can kind of soften some of these edges and they blend out to nothing, whereas if this was on a different coloured background, well, you'd have to be a lot more careful with the way you are rendering with your darker tones. Again, apologies for the camera, but you pretty much get the gist of it from seeing the first one created. So obviously this is only one side of the Harley tank. We did both sides to match, but we thought we'd just film one side for you, so we picked the better side. Not that there's that much difference, but I think from the filming perspective, this side's better anyway. So now back to our main feature artwork. And while we've still got the transparent black in there, I'm just going back over certain areas. Just to again further detail, I'm blending some of that grunge, softening it so it looks like it's appearing out of the black void of the tank. Again, grabbing my texture template, and I'm working over the top now with the black. Sharpening any other areas that need it. And fading out as well from the feature artwork into that grunge, so it looks like the grunge is sitting nice and behind him. Cleaning up some of the edges. Now with the camera zoomed in, I wanted to get a bit of a brighter highlight within the hair section and just certain other little points. So I thought I'd do that using a real fine brush. The Trident paint brushes really nicely as well, so we're just going to use a bit of white. You can see I've just hit that highlight in the eye as well, but I'm just going to detail some of these strands. So there's nothing wrong with switching to a brush, especially when they're this fine, and it's just going to give you a bit of a different kind of texture, because the airbrush is obviously really soft. So by utilizing the brush and then blending back over that as well with an airbrush always looks really cool. So I'm pretty much using this Trident near enough to being a straight mix. So I think I've only just put maybe 10% reducer or something in this just to get a bit more flow, but it does really brush nicely, and you don't want it too thin for brushing. So if you use it pretty much straight out of the bottle and add like I said, 10%, that would be perfect. Obviously different colors might perform a little bit different, but I'm keeping it relatively dry because I don't want too much on there either. Just kind of want to pick out some highlights and make the hair really scraggly. It just gives you that chance to get those extremely fine, sharp hairs in there. So adds a bit of extra depth, which is nice. So you can see that's really pulled out those strands. Pretty happy with that. So we're going to end the video here. Hope you enjoyed watching. We're going to show you a couple of photos of the completed artwork on the tank. You can see it all 2-pack cleared here. So you can see all the details really popped out. Now you can really notice the flow as well of those skulls and that smoke. A bit of a close-up there as well. So hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching, and we will see you shortly for another video very, very soon. Bye for now. Until next time, feel free to check out any of our other videos, and thanks again for watching. We do really appreciate it. In the meantime, if you haven't already, feel free to hit subscribe. We have plenty of step-by-step tutorials, quick tips, airbrush insights, showcase, live streams, and much more. You can also visit our website at airbrushdasylum.com.au. Thanks for watching.